In the dry heart of the Arabian Peninsula, where the desert's wind carves silence into the stones, there exists a place that has defied time itself: Makkah. For over 1,000 years before Islam's dawn, Makkah stood as a remote yet enduring settlement. It wasn't a city of marble or empire. It was a sanctuary built from survival, a place whose history began not with conquest, but with a well, a valley, and a gathering of tribes. Our earliest recorded glimpse of Makkah dates back to around 150 CE, when the Greco-Roman scholar Claudius Ptolemy mapped a place he called Macoraba. Scholars long debated its meaning, but linguistic and geographic evidence align it with the site of modern-day Makkah. It appears as a small yet notable settlement in the Arabian interior, distant from the Mediterranean world, but connected through the long threads of desert trade. Ptolemy's record confirms one crucial fact. By the 2nd century CE, Makkah was already known beyond Arabia. At this time, the Arabian Peninsula was not united under a single authority. The north was influenced by the Nabateans and the Roman client kingdoms of Arabia Patria. The south was dominated by the Himyarite kingdom in Yemen, controlling vast trade routes of frankincense and myrrh. Between them lay a vast, sparsely inhabited zone of tribes, oases, and merchant outposts. It was here, in this middle ground, that Makkah quietly grew. The settlement's position was no accident. It lay along the ancient caravan routes that connected the southern incense ports of Qana, Aden, and Dhofar with the Levant and the Mediterranean markets. For centuries, caravans loaded with spices, resins, ivory, and textiles crossed these sands. Makkah, with its protective mountains and central location, served as a natural resting point, a hub for traders and pilgrims alike. Yet geography alone does not explain its survival. Makkah's heart beat around a sacred site, the Kaaba, a cubic sanctuary that, even before Islam, was revered by the tribes of Arabia. The structure, made of stone and draped in cloth, stood as a spiritual center long before the Quranic revelation. Ancient traditions tell of it being built or rebuilt several times by local tribes and by Abrahamic descendants, though the exact timeline remains hidden in legend. By the time of Ptolemy's Macoraba, the Kaaba was already a focal point for tribal pilgrimage, a sanctuary where bloodshed was forbidden and trade flourished under divine protection. The 3rd and 4th century CE were periods of gradual transformation. While the great empires of Rome and Persia contended for dominance in the north, Arabia remained largely independent, a web of tribal alliances and trade confederations. Makkah's survival depended on diplomacy and neutrality. It was not a city of soldiers, but of merchants. The tribes that gathered there observed sacred months when no fighting was allowed, and under that fragile peace, the city's markets thrived. One of the oldest of these markets was Ukais, not far from Makkah, a place where trade, poetry, and arbitration intersected. Here, tribes exchanged goods and settled disputes. Poets recited verses that preserved memory and lineage. Makkah was the spiritual complement to this mercantile culture, a place where the gods of Arabia were honored collectively. By the 4th century CE, the Quraysh tribe had begun to establish influence in Makkah. Their lineage, rooted in the Kinana Confederation, positioned them as custodians and traders. Unlike many nomadic tribes, the Quraysh were semi-settled. They recognized Makkah's potential not as a military base, but as a node of safe commerce. Under their emerging leadership, the city developed a reputation for security and trust, values that would later prove central to its destiny. While Makkah remained politically minor compared to the urban centers of Arabia Felix, southern Arabia, its reputation as a harem, a sacred, inviolable zone, gave it a rare kind of power. Within its valley, conflict ceased. Enemies might trade under the same roof. This sanctity attracted tribes from across the peninsula, ensuring that even those who did not dwell there revered the place from afar. Religious life in this era was deeply pluralistic. Makkah's Kaaba housed numerous idols, representing deities from various tribes, a reflection of the wider Arabian pantheon. Chief among them was Hubal, a deity associated with divination and fate, and others like Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, revered by tribes across Western Arabia. To later monotheists, these were relics of polytheism. To their worshippers, they were symbols of cosmic order and protection in a harsh, unpredictable land. Trade and faith are intertwined. Pilgrims visiting the Kaaba often brought offerings and merchandise. The combination of ritual, market, and neutrality turned Makkah into an early cross-cultural center, where religious devotion supported economic prosperity. The city's rhythm followed the caravan's departure and return, marking the seasons of survival. Further south, the Himyarite kingdom grew wealthy from maritime trade, but internal conflicts and invasions by Aksumite Ethiopia in the 4th century began to destabilize Yemen. As the southern incense routes waned, northern caravan paths became more vital. This shift indirectly benefited Makkah, which now stood as one of the few consistent waypoints between the Red Sea ports and the interior. The city itself remained modest in scale, a cluster of mud brick dwellings, surrounded by rocky hills and wadis that channeled rare floods through the valley. The Zamzam well, believed to have been rediscovered in the centuries before this period, sustained life in this arid setting. For travelers, the well symbolized divine favor, water where none should exist. By 400 CE, Makkah had already developed the distinct cultural identity that would carry it into the Islamic age, a community defined by trade, sanctuary, and custodianship. It was a city of peace amid violence, a place where tribes gathered not to fight, but to negotiate, worship, and trade. No empire claimed it, no army built it. Its power lay in its neutrality and in the faith that surrounded its sanctuary. This combination of geography, commerce, and religion made Makkah unlike any other settlement in Arabia. When future centuries brought the great religious and political transformations that would define the region, Makkah would already stand as the heart of Arabia, waiting for the revelation that would transform its quiet valley into the axis of the world's fastest-growing faith. In the centuries to come, that idea would give rise to a civilization. But in the beginning, Makkah was simply a place where humanity and divinity met in the stillness of a valley under the desert sun. By the early 5th century, Makkah had grown from a caravan halt into a sanctuary city, a place of refuge, trade, and spiritual convergence. The Kaaba stood at its center, modest yet sacred, attracting pilgrims from every corner of the Arabian Peninsula. Around it, the city's power began to crystallize in the hands of a single tribe, the Quraysh. This new era would see Makkah transformed from a desert sanctuary into the beating heart of Arabia, a center of both commerce and belief. The Quraysh were a branch of the larger Kinana Confederation, a tribe of noble lineage and strategic insight. Their rise was gradual but decisive. By the early 400 CE, the Quraysh had assumed control over Makkah's sacred precinct, assuming custodianship of the Kaaba and the trade networks tied to it. They understood something fundamental, that control over Makkah was not about armies or conquest, but about stewardship. To rule Makkah meant to protect its peace, to mediate disputes, and to guarantee safety for pilgrims and merchants. At the center of this transformation stood a figure whose name would echo through Arabian memory, Qusay ibn Kilab, a man whose vision reshaped Makkah's identity. Qusay, believed to have lived in the mid-5th century CE, consolidated the scattered clans of Quraysh and established political order in the city. He founded the Dar al-Nadwa, a council house where tribal elders met to deliberate, organize trade, and maintain the sacred calendar. Under Qusay's leadership, the Quraysh transitioned from a tribal group to a structured civic authority, the closest Arabia had to urban governance. Qusay's reforms were revolutionary in a region dominated by clan politics. He divided responsibilities among Makkah's leading families: custodianship of the Kaaba, guardianship of its keys, management of pilgrim welfare, and oversight of war and peace. Each role became hereditary, forming a system that would endure for centuries. He also organized the feeding and watering of pilgrims, an act of both generosity and political wisdom. In a desert world, water was life, and Qusay ensured that those who came to Makkah were sustained. Through this sacred hospitality, he bound tribes to the city's service and reinforced its sanctity. Under the Quraysh, Makkah's economy expanded dramatically. By the late 5th and early 6th centuries, it had become a mercantile powerhouse within Arabia's trade network. Caravans set out in two major seasons, northward to Syria and Byzantium in the summer, southward to Yemen in the winter. These routes, immortalized later in Islamic scripture, carried spices, textiles, leather, and precious metals. The Quraysh acted as intermediaries, not producers, but facilitators connecting the desert's tribes to the markets of empires. To the north lay the Byzantine-controlled Levant, to the east, the Persian Empire, to the south, the Himyarite kingdom, now under shifting influences from Ethiopia's Aksumite rulers. These superpowers eyed Arabia for its strategic location, yet few ventured deep into its heart. Makkah, isolated and sacred, remained untouched. Its protection was not enforced by legions, but by the ancient concept of haram, a zone of peace sanctified by divine decree. Within it, no weapon was to be raised. This neutrality made Makkah a safe harbor for traders from all tribes and faiths. The Kaaba itself was the symbolic center of this balance. Encased in simple stone and draped in fine cloth, it contained numerous idols, tribal representations of deities believed to intercede with the divine. Hubal, the chief idol, stood within, alongside others like Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, goddesses venerated across Arabia. Each tribe, upon visiting Makkah, paid homage to its own deity but shared the space peacefully. The Kaaba thus functioned as a unifying spiritual market, mirroring the commercial markets outside its walls. Religious pluralism and economic pragmatism became Makkah's dual pillars. Its citizens were pragmatic in faith. They understood that unity meant survival. The Quraysh carefully maintained this religious order, neither imposing nor excluding beliefs. Instead, they acted as custodians of a sacred status quo, ensuring that no tribe felt alienated from the sanctuary's rituals. This inclusiveness made Makkah a microcosm of Arabia itself, diverse, yet bound by shared reverence. Meanwhile, Arabia beyond Makkah remained a mosaic of shifting loyalties. The Ghassanids, Arab allies of Byzantium, controlled much of the northwest. The Lakhmids, allied with Persia, dominated the northeast. To the south, Yemen oscillated between Himyarite, Aksumite, and Persian control. These power blocks often clashed, disrupting trade routes along the coasts. Makkah's inland position, however, insulated it from such conflicts. Its survival depended on neutrality, a delicate balance that the Quraysh mastered through generations of careful diplomacy. By the late 5th century, Qusay's descendants had divided into several clans, including Hashim, Umayyah, Maksum, and Abd Shams. Each would play a defining role in the city's future. The Hashim clan, named after Hashim ibn Abd Manaf, Qusay's great-grandson, became renowned for generosity and trade acumen. Hashim established agreements with northern and southern kingdoms to guarantee safe passage for Quraysh caravans. These pacts, economic treaties of trust, cemented Makkah's supremacy in Arabian commerce. Hashim's influence extended beyond trade. During the pilgrimage seasons, he provided food to the poor and water to pilgrims, reinforcing the Quraysh's role as protectors of the sacred. His death in Gaza around 497 CE symbolized how deeply intertwined Makkah's fortunes were with the wider world. Its leaders now traveled far beyond the peninsula, weaving Arabia into the fabric of global exchange. As centuries turned, Makkah's prestige grew. Its markets, particularly souk, ukase, attracted poets and orators from across Arabia. Language became powerful. Poetry preserved honor, memory, and law. Verses recited in Makkah traveled through oral networks, shaping the collective consciousness of the peninsula. It was through this poetic culture that ideas, myths, and news spread long before written texts unified them. Yet beneath this flourishing surface, Arabia was changing. By the 6th century, monotheistic faiths were making inroads across the region. Judaism had gained footholds in Yemen. Christianity had reached Najran, Hira, and the northern frontiers. Missionaries, traders, and exiles carried these beliefs, sowing the seeds of spiritual transformation. Makkah, however, remained devoted to its ancestral gods, clinging to traditions that bound its tribal world together. The Quraysh, cautious of ideological upheaval, saw in polytheism a unifying order, a fragile equilibrium that must not be disturbed. Around this time, a fateful event reshaped southern Arabia. In 525 CE, the Aksumite ruler Abraham al-Ashram, a Christian viceroy of Yemen, sought to redirect Arabian pilgrimage away from Makkah to his grand cathedral in Sana'a. When his ambitions failed, he launched a military expedition to destroy the Kaaba. Riding with him were war elephants, a sight unseen in Arabia. But according to tradition, his campaign was thwarted near Makkah, his army struck by disease and disaster. Whether seen as divine intervention or historical coincidence, the Year of the Elephant became etched in memory as a turning point signaling that Makkah was protected by powers greater than kings. That same year, 570 CE, marked another event that would alter history: the birth of Muhammad ibn Abd Allah, descendant of Hashim, born into the Quraysh's Hashemite clan. No one could have foreseen that this child, born into a tribe of merchants, would one day challenge the very foundations of Arabian religion and power. By the time of Muhammad's birth, Makkah had reached the height of its pre-Islamic prosperity. The Quraysh presided over a city that was both sacred and secure, an oasis of stability amid a fragmented Arabia. Its rituals, markets, and neutrality gave it influence far beyond its walls. Yet beneath that prosperity, a quiet discontent stirred. Inequality widened between merchant elites and the poor. Spiritual hunger deepened among those weary of idolatry and tribal divisions. The city's peace was fragile, balanced between devotion and decadence, faith and commerce. Makkah's gods had served its people well, but unseen, a new voice was forming in its valleys, one that would soon call the city and the world to transformation. The Quraysh had built a sanctuary of stone and trade, but history was preparing to test its soul. The story of Makkah enters one of its most defining eras around the year 570 CE, year that would echo across centuries as Am al-Fil, the Year of the Elephant. It is remembered not only for the legendary expedition of Abraham, but also for the birth of a man who would transform the city's destiny, Muhammad ibn Abd Allah. To grasp this turning point, we must step back to the larger forces shaping Arabia. The 6th century was a time of turmoil and ambition in the southern reaches of the peninsula. The Aksumite kingdom of Ethiopia, having established dominance in Yemen, sought to expand its influence northward. Abraham al-Ashram, the Christian governor of Yemen, was driven by both faith and pride. His ambition was clear: to replace the pagan pilgrimage of Makkah with a new center of worship in Sana'a, anchored around his magnificent cathedral, Al-Khalais. When the Arab tribes continued to honor the Kaaba, ignoring his church, Abraham's patience snapped. He gathered an army, equipped with war elephants, creatures alien to the Arabian sands, and marched toward the Hijaz. Islamic tradition holds that when Abraha's forces neared Makkah, divine retribution struck. Birds, it is said, pelted the army with stones of baked clay, leaving destruction in their wake. Abraha's campaign collapsed before reaching the city. Whether one interprets the story as a miracle or a metaphor, its historical resonance lies in what it symbolized: Makkah's survival against imperial ambition. It emerged untouched, its sanctity reinforced. The event affirmed the belief that the Kaaba was under divine protection, a theme that would later define its spiritual aura in Islam. In that same year, a child was born in the Hashemite clan of Quraysh, an orphan descendant of Abd al-Muttalib, the city's respected elder and custodian of the Kaaba. His father, Abdullah, had died before his birth. His mother, Amina, would die when he was 6. The boy, Muhammad, grew up in a society bound by lineage and tribe, where survival depended on protection and patronage. Yet his early years were marked by loss and humility. Raised first by his grandfather and later by his uncle Abu Talib, he came of age in a city at the crossroads of commerce and belief. The Makkah of Muhammad's youth was vibrant but divided. It was a city of contrasts: opulent merchants and impoverished laborers, devotion and decadence, hospitality and exploitation. The Kaaba remained the spiritual heart of Arabia, hosting hundreds of idols. Yet moral decay had set in. Gambling, tribal vengeance, and inequality eroded the values of compassion and justice once prized by the Arabs. Slavery was common, and the weak often had no recourse against the strong. The religious life of the city had become transactional offerings, and rituals served more as commerce than conviction. By the late 6th century, Makkah's prosperity owed much to its control of the caravan trade. Quraysh merchants dominated routes stretching north to the Byzantine Levant and south to Yemen. These journeys, celebrated in Arabian poetry, brought wealth and prestige. The Quraysh had mastered diplomacy, maintaining neutrality between warring powers, forming alliances with both the Byzantines and Persians. In this delicate balance, Makkah thrived as a city of peace, yet spiritual restlessness grew among its thinkers and poets. In these years, a quiet undercurrent of monotheistic ideas began to flow through Arabia. Jews and Christians had already established enclaves in the region in Najran, Hira, and Yemen. Travelers carried tales of prophets and revelations. A small but significant group known as the Hanifs, seekers of Abraham's original monotheism, began rejecting idol worship. Among them was Zayd ibn Amr, who refused to bow to the idols of Quraysh and sought a purer faith. Their presence in Makkah hinted that the old spiritual order was beginning to crack. Muhammad's own life unfolded quietly amid these shifting sands. In his youth, he earned the title Al-Amin, the trustworthy one, for his integrity in trade. His reputation for fairness and honesty set him apart in a society driven by profit and prestige. Around the age of 25, he entered the service of Khadija bint Khuwaylid, a wealthy widow and prominent merchant. Impressed by his character, Khadija proposed marriage, and their union became one of partnership and respect. Together, they managed caravans that traveled to Syria and beyond, strengthening Makkah's commercial reach. For nearly 15 years, Muhammad lived as a respected member of Makkah's society, neither rich nor poor, but known for his dignity and moderation. Yet within him grew a quiet unease. The idols, the inequity, the spiritual void all seemed to weigh on his conscience. He began to withdraw periodically to the cave of Hira, a mountain retreat northeast of the city. There, in solitude, he would meditate, seeking meaning in the stillness of the desert. Around the year 610 CE, during one of these retreats, history pivoted. In the darkness of the cave, a voice spoke, commanding him to recite. It was, according to Islamic belief, the angel Gabriel delivering the first revelation of what would become the Quran. Trembling, Muhammad returned home to Khadija, who comforted him and affirmed his experience. This moment marked the beginning of Islamic revelation and with it, the transformation of Makkah from a city of idols to the axis of a new faith. For the first few years, Muhammad shared his message quietly among close companions. His teachings emphasized monotheism, Tawhid, the belief in one God, and the moral duty of humans to act with justice and compassion. The message was simple yet revolutionary, that all were equal before the Creator, that wealth and lineage held no spiritual privilege, and that mercy was greater than pride. But such ideas struck at the very structure of Makkah's power. The Quraysh elite saw danger in them. Their authority rested on the sanctity of the Kaaba and the idol trade that accompanied it. Pilgrimage brought immense wealth to the city, and to challenge polytheism was to threaten its economy. As the number of believers grew, the ruling clans responded with hostility. Early Muslims were ridiculed, boycotted, and tortured. Among the first to suffer were the poor, the enslaved, and the socially outcast, those who had little to lose but everything to gain from a message of equality. Through persecution and hardship, the small community held firm. Khadija's unwavering support sustained Muhammad through these years of isolation. His uncle Abu Talib's protection shielded him from physical harm, though it could not shield him from grief. Around 619 CE, known as the Year of Sorrow, both Khadija and Abu Talib passed away, leaving him bereft. With their deaths, his position in Makkah became increasingly precarious. By this time, the Quraysh had grown alarmed. Muhammad's teachings were spreading beyond his immediate circle, unsettling the city's merchants and elders. In a council meeting at Dar al-Nadwa, they debated how to silence him. Some proposed exile, others execution. The tension between the old and the new order reached a breaking point. But Muhammad's mission was not to end in Makkah's alleys. Beyond the city's mountains, in the oasis town of Yathrib, later Medina, his message found new listeners. Delegations from the north, tired of tribal conflict, invited him to mediate their disputes. In this invitation lay the next great transformation of Arabia and of history. As the first decade of the 7th century closed, Makkah stood on the threshold of revolution. The Kaaba's idols still gleamed in the sunlight, the markets still thrived, and the Quraysh still ruled. Yet, in quiet homes across the city, new words were being whispered, words that spoke of one God, of justice, and of mercy. The sands of Makkah were shifting. The old order had not yet fallen, but its foundations trembled beneath the weight of revelation. What began in a cave would soon reshape empires. The dawn of revelation in 610 CE marked not only a turning point in the life of Muhammad, but a rupture in the long continuity of Makkah's past. What began as a solitary experience in the darkness of the cave of Hira soon grew into a movement that would reshape Arabia and, in time, the world. The city that had long been the custodian of idols was now confronted by a message that demanded their destruction. For nearly 3 years, the revelations remained private. Muhammad shared them only with those closest to his wife Khadija, his cousin ibn Abi Lib, his friend Abu Bakr, and his adopted son Zayd. The verses spoke of the oneness of God, of accountability in the afterlife, and of the moral obligations of human beings, justice, mercy, honesty, and humility. They denounced the arrogance of wealth and the cruelty of social hierarchy. In a city where lineage and commerce defined worth, these teachings struck with quiet but seismic force. When Muhammad began to preach publicly around 613 CE, the Quraysh reacted with disbelief, mockery, and then hostility. The Kaaba was not merely a temple, it was the engine of Makkah's prosperity. Every idol housed within it represented a tribe, a pact, a source of income. The Quraysh feared that monotheism would unravel the delicate web of alliances that sustained the city's economy. To declare that there is no God but God, was not simply heresy, it was rebellion against the civic order. As the message spread, the Quraysh tried to suppress it through ridicule and negotiation. They offered Muhammad wealth, rank, and influence if only he would stop condemning their gods. His reply was uncompromising. If they placed the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not abandon this call. The resolve of that statement became the heartbeat of the early Muslim movement. Repression followed. The weak and poor slaves like Bilal ibn Rabah were tortured for their faith. The Quraysh imposed a boycott on Muhammad's clan, the Banu Hashim, cutting them off from trade and marriage alliances. For nearly 3 years, they endured near famine in the mountain pass known as Shib Abi Lib. Hunger and isolation broke many, but not the conviction of the believers. When the boycott finally collapsed around 619 CE, it left deep scars. That same year brought devastating personal loss deaths of Khadija and Abu Lib. The year would be remembered as Am al-Huzn, the year of sorrow. With his wife and protector gone, Muhammad found himself increasingly vulnerable. The Quraysh's hostility intensified, yet, amid this grief, new horizons opened. He sought refuge in nearby tribes, traveling to the town of If, but there he met only rejection and violence. Stones were hurled at him until his feet bled. Still, he prayed for those who harmed him, moment that would later embody the patience that defined his mission. Around 620 CE, a small delegation from the oasis town of Yathrib visited Makkah during the pilgrimage season. They listened to his message and saw in it a solution to their own turmoil. Yathrib, plagued by intertribal feuds between the Aws and Khazraj, needed a mediator. They invited Muhammad to migrate north and lead them, pledging their protection and allegiance. The following year, more converts from Yathrib met him secretly at Aqaba, forming the first compact between Makkah and what would become Medina. In 622 CE, Muhammad received word that the Quraysh were plotting his assassination. Under the cover of night, he and his companion Abu Bakr slipped out of Makkah, hiding in the cave of Thor south of the city before journeying northward. This migration would mark the beginning of the Islamic calendar, a symbol of transition from persecution to community. When Muhammad arrived in Yathrib, he found not merely sanctuary but the seed of a new society. The city was renamed Madinat an-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina. There, he drafted the Constitution of Medina, an agreement binding Muslims, Jews, and allied tribes into a single polity. It recognized freedom of religion and collective responsibility for defense, civic charter, unprecedented in Arabia. For the first time, faith had become the basis of political order. But the Quraysh could not ignore this new community rising on their trade routes. Within 2 years, conflict was inevitable. In 624 CE, the Muslims confronted a Quraysh caravan at Badr, a small valley southwest of Medina. Against overwhelming odds, the outnumbered Muslims achieved a decisive victory. The triumph was seen as divine vindication. It shattered the aura of Quraysh's invincibility. The following year brought a reversal. At Uhud in 625 CE, the Quraysh returned with vengeance, led by Abu Sufyan ibn Harb. The Muslims, initially successful, faltered after breaking ranks, and Muhammad himself was wounded. Yet, even in defeat, the resolve of the community endured. In 627 CE, the Quraysh mounted their largest campaign, the Battle of the Trench, Al-Khandak. Guided by Persian tactics introduced by Salman al-Farisi, the Muslims dug a defensive trench around Medina. The siege failed. Exhausted and demoralized, the Quraysh withdrew, their political dominance fading. The tide had turned. In 628 CE, Muhammad negotiated the Treaty of Hudaybiyah with the Quraysh, securing peaceful access to pilgrimage routes. Though many of his followers saw it as a compromise, it marked a strategic victory. It acknowledged the Muslims as a legitimate force in Arabia and allowed Islam to spread without the shadow of constant war. Within 2 years, conversions multiplied across the peninsula. Former Quraysh adversaries, including Abu Sufyan, began to see the writing on the wall. In 630 CE, when the Quraysh violated the treaty by supporting an allied tribe's attack, Muhammad marched on Makkah with an army of 10,000. The city, realizing resistance was futile, surrendered without significant bloodshed. The conquest of Makkah was unlike any victory Arabia had seen. There was no massacre, no looting, no vengeance. Muhammad entered the city humbly, his head bowed, reciting words of mercy. He walked to the Kaaba and touched its stone walls had stood since before his birth and declared them cleansed. One by one, the idols were brought down, their fragments swept away. Truth has come, he proclaimed, and falsehood has perished. In that moment, Makkah's long spiritual evolution reached its culmination. The Kaaba, once home to 360 idols, was rededicated to the worship of one God. The ancient sanctuary had been reborn. Yet Muhammad did not remain in Makkah. His mission extended beyond conquest. He returned to Medina, continuing to receive revelations and to guide the expanding Muslim community. Delegations from across Arabia arrived, pledging allegiance. In 632 CE, he performed his farewell pilgrimage, delivering a sermon that encapsulated his message: equality of all humans, sanctity of life and property, and adherence to faith and justice. Shortly after his return to Medina, he fell ill. On a June morning in 632 CE, Muhammad passed away, leaving behind no wealth, no crown, no army, only a community bound by faith and a city transformed. Makkah, the city of his birth and his struggle, had become the heart of a new civilization. From the Kaaba, now purified of idols, radiated a creed that would cross deserts, seas, and centuries. The Quraysh, once his fiercest opponents, became its guardians and carriers. As history turned its page, the city of Makkah stood quiet again, its valleys the same, its walls familiar, yet its meaning forever altered. What had once been a local shrine had become the spiritual axis of the world. And from that moment onward, every Muslim who turned in prayer would face Makkah, linking humanity to a sanctuary that had endured since time immemorial. The revelation had begun in silence, in a cave above the city. It ended with people united and a world awakened. When the Prophet Muhammad passed away in 632 CE, the city of Makkah was no longer the isolated trading outpost it had once been. It had become the sacred heart of a rising civilization. The Kaaba, cleansed of idols, was now the central symbol of unity for a faith spreading at a pace unprecedented in recorded history. But with the Prophet gone, the Muslim community faced a defining question: who would lead them? From this uncertainty emerged the Rashidun Caliphate era of the rightly guided caliphs. Makkah itself was not the seat of power. That would be Medina, then later Damascus and Baghdad. Yet Makkah's moral authority remained absolute. It was the Qibla, the direction of prayer, the goal of pilgrimage, and the physical proof of unity among believers. The first caliph, Abu Bakr, r. 632 to 634 CE, upheld the Prophet's legacy by consolidating Arabia under Islam. During the Ridda Wars, campaigns against tribes that renounced Islam after Muhammad's death, Makkah stood as a spiritual anchor. Its Kaaba reminded the Muslims that their purpose transcended tribal loyalties. Under Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, r. 634 to 644 CE, Islam expanded into Syria, Persia, and Egypt. Though Makkah was far from the frontiers, its reputation grew with each victory. Every new convert turned toward its sanctuary in prayer. Caliph Uthman ibn Affan, r. 644 to 656 CE, ordered the compilation of the Quran into a single written text. The words that had first descended upon the mountains above Makkah were now gathered, standardized, and preserved, moment that defined the intellectual heart of the new civilization. But the unity of faith soon collided with the reality of politics. During Ali ibn Abi Talib's caliphate, r. 656 to 661 CE, internal divisions tore through the early Muslim world. The civil war known as the First Fitna fractured the community. Though Makkah remained distant from the centers of battle, its sanctity was tested. In 683 CE, during the Second Fitna, the city itself became a battlefield. The Umayyad Caliphate, which had moved the capital to Damascus, faced rebellion from Abdullah ibn al-Zubair, a noble of the Quraysh and companion of the Prophet. Ibn al-Zubair declared Makkah his seat of authority and sought refuge within the Kaaba's sacred precincts. In 683 CE, the Umayyad army besieged the city. Catapults hurled stones and fire upon the Kaaba. The black cloth that covered it burned. Its walls were cracked. For the first time since its reconstruction by the Quraysh generations earlier, the Kaaba was desecrated by Muslim hands. The Kaaba was rebuilt in 692 CE after Ibn al-Zubair's defeat and death. The Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan ordered its reconstruction close to its earlier Quraysh design, and the sanctity of the site was reaffirmed. Yet the memory of its violation left a scarred reminder that even the holiest city could be drawn into the turbulence of empire. The Abbasid Caliphate, rising in 750 CE, shifted the political center eastward to Baghdad, but it also restored attention to the holy cities. The Abbasids saw themselves as the protectors of Islam's sacred geography. Makkah, though not the administrative capital, was maintained with extraordinary care. The caliphs financed renovations, maintained water supplies for pilgrims through the Zamzam well, and built guest houses for travelers arriving for the Hajj. The Hajj itself became a defining institution of the Abbasid era. Caravans set out from Cairo, Kufa, Damascus, and beyond, carrying thousands of pilgrims across deserts and mountains. For weeks, they traveled, bound by faith, converging on one destination. The annual gathering of scholars, merchants, and rulers made Makkah not just a religious hub, but a center of intellectual and cultural exchange. Ideas from distant corners of the Islamic world met in its streets. Travelers like al-Makdisi and Ibn Jubair described the majesty of the pilgrimage, the rhythm of prayers, and the echo of countless tongues uttering the same words, Labbaik, Allahumma labbaik. During this period, Makkah's governance was typically entrusted to the sheriff's local descendants of the Prophet through his grandson Hassan ibn Ali. Though nominally under caliphal authority, they wielded considerable autonomy. They oversaw the city's affairs, maintained peace during pilgrimage seasons, and collected taxes from the influx of pilgrims. In 930 CE, however, Makkah faced one of its darkest hours. The Qarmatians, a radical sect from eastern Arabia, stormed the city during the pilgrimage season. They slaughtered pilgrims, desecrated the Zamzam well with corpses, and looted the Kaaba. The black stone, the revered relic embedded in the Kaaba's corner, was taken to their base in Bahrain. For over 20 years, it remained in Qarmatian hands, an act of sacrilege that shocked the Muslim world. It was finally returned in 952 CE, though it had been broken into fragments. The event underscored Makkah's symbolic power. To attack, it was to challenge Islam itself. By the 11th century, the Abbasid Caliphate's authority waned, and regional powers rose. Makkah's administration shifted among various rulers, the Fatimids of Egypt, the Ayyubids of Syria, and later the Mamluks. Despite these changes, its sanctity endured. Each ruler, regardless of sect or allegiance, sought legitimacy through service to the holy city. They funded repairs to the Kaaba, endowed hostels for pilgrims, and guaranteed safe passage for caravans. The pilgrimage routes became arteries of both devotion and diplomacy. Under the Fatimids, 909 to 1171 CE, a Shia dynasty based in Cairo. Makkah received both patronage and tension. The Fatimids asserted control over the Hajj, at times clashing with Abbasid interests. Yet their contributions to the city's architecture and water systems were significant. The Ayyubids, following the rise of Salah al-Din Saladin in the late 12th century, reclaimed control and reaffirmed Sunni dominance. They fortified the city, improved its sanitation, and supported scholars who taught within the precincts of the Grand Mosque. By the 13th century, as the Mongols advanced across Asia, destroying Baghdad in 1258 CE, the symbolic weight of Makkah grew even greater. With the Abbasid Caliphate extinguished, the center of Islamic authority became diffused. Makkah stood as one of the few unbroken links to Islam's earliest past. Pilgrims continued to arrive, regardless of the political chaos engulfing the wider Muslim world. The rituals of circumambulating the Kaaba, drinking from Zamzam, and walking between Safa and Marwa remained unchanged, rituals older than empires, impervious to conquest. Through these centuries, Makkah's role was paradoxical. It was both peripheral and central, far from imperial capitals, yet the spiritual nucleus around which all revolved. Dynasties rose and fell, but each measured its legitimacy by its care for the holy city. Makkah needed no armies, no throne, no palace. Its power lay in sanctity, not sovereignty. By the close of this era, around 1258 CE, the city had endured invasion, fire, famine, and political intrigue. Yet it remained untouched in its essence. The Kaaba still stood at its center, draped in a black covering that was renewed each year, cloth symbolizing continuity through the storms of time. Makkah's guardians, the Sharifs, had become the city's enduring custodians, balancing allegiance between powerful empires while protecting the sanctity of the Haram. Even as the world beyond shifted from Baghdad to Cairo, from Damascus to Anatolia, pilgrims still began their journeys with a single intention: to reach the house built by Abraham and rededicated by Muhammad. The centuries of empire could not alter that call. Thus, by the end of the 13th century, Makkah had weathered the turbulence of empire and civil war, surviving not through might, but through faith. Its story was no longer only the story of Arabia, it was the spiritual chronicle of a civilization that stretched from the Atlantic to the Industry. As the Mongol fires dimmed and new powers emerged in Egypt and Anatolia, Makkah would soon enter another chapter, one of renewal under new guardianship, where old sanctity met the ambitions of the age to come. When Baghdad fell to the Mongols in 1258 CE, the Abbasid Caliphate, the intellectual and political axis of the Muslim world, was reduced to ashes. Its libraries burned, its scholars slain, its caliphs silenced. The world of Islam trembled. Yet far from the Tigris, in the mountains and valleys of western Arabia, a small city continued its rhythm of prayer, unbroken by war. Makkah endured. The fall of Baghdad did not shake its sanctity. Instead, it magnified it. In the power vacuum left by the Abbasids, new forces rose across the Middle East. In North Africa, Mamluks of Egypt, the Seljuks of Anatolia, and local dynasties of Yemen and the Hijaz. Each sought to claim the mantle of guardianship over Islam's holiest cities, Makkah and Medina. To rule the Muslim heartlands was one thing. To serve as custodian of the two sanctuaries was another. That title conferred a moral legitimacy no crown or conquest could match. The Mamluk Sultanate, established in Egypt in 1250 CE, would soon assume this role. The Mamluks were warrior slaves turned rulers, Turkic and Circassian soldiers who rose from servitude to sovereignty. Though their origins lay in military might, they grasped the symbolic power of faith. When the Mongols swept westward, it was the Mamluks who halted them at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 CE, preserving the heart of Islam. In the same century, they took on the sacred duty of protecting the Hijaz, ensuring that the Hajj pilgrimage to Makkah remained safe and open to the faithful. The Mamluk sultans did not rule Makkah directly. Instead, they governed through the sharifs of Makkah, local descendants of the Prophet Muhammad through his grandson Hassan ibn Ali. These sharifs held the dual role of religious custodians and local rulers. Their authority within Makkah was respected, while their allegiance to Cairo was maintained through gifts, subsidies, and symbolic recognition. In return, the Mamluks funded the maintenance of the Haram, repaired wells and roads, and ensured the annual delivery of the black cloth that covered the Kaaba. Each year, this sacred fabric was woven in Cairo and carried with ceremony in the Mamluk caravan, a grand procession that traveled from Egypt across the Sinai and the Red Sea to Makkah. To see the Mamluk arrive was to witness the connection between distant capitals and the sacred heart of Islam. As it entered the city, pilgrims cheered, scholars recited blessings, and the Kaaba was once again draped in its new covering act, both devotional and political. During this period, Makkah remained a small settlement by modern standards. Its houses clustered around the Grand Mosque, its streets narrow and dusty. The economy was almost entirely dependent on pilgrimage. Merchants sold food, clothing, and relics to pilgrims. Innkeepers housed them, and local tribes guarded caravan routes for payment. Beyond the city, the Hijaz Mountains loomed harsh, barren, yet protective. The same landscape that had once sheltered the Prophet's message now safeguarded his city's sanctity. It was in these centuries that travelers began to leave detailed records of their pilgrimages, giving us rare glimpses into Makkah's medieval life. Among them was Ibn Jubair, a 12th century Andalusian pilgrim whose account paints a vivid portrait of the city. He described the great throng of believers circling the Kaaba, the hum of voices rising into the desert night, and the profound unity of purpose that bound them together. Later, in the 14th century, Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan explorer who journeyed across Africa, Asia, and beyond, wrote of his visit to Makkah, of the crowds of pilgrims, the majesty of the rituals, and the sense that this city was the axis of a world larger than any empire. These accounts capture a city that, though small in size, towered in spiritual gravity. While the great capitals of the age, Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad, were centers of scholarship and trade, Makkah was the heart that reminded them of their shared faith. Yet even as pilgrims came in peace, Makkah was never far from the turbulence of the wider world. The Red Sea became a contested corridor between Muslim and Christian powers. By the late 13th century, the Crusades had weakened but not vanished. European fleets began to probe the Red Sea, threatening the trade and pilgrimage routes that sustained the city. The Mamluks fortified ports like Jeddah to protect access to the Hijaz. At the same time, internal rivalries within Mamluk Egypt sometimes spilled into the Hijaz. Competing Sharifian families in Makkah vied for dominance, their alliances shifting with the changing winds of Cairo's politics. Some were deposed or assassinated. Others ruled for decades with wisdom and restraint. Through it all, the Kaaba remained untouched, the ritual's uninterrupted miracle of continuity amid chaos. In 1349 CE, the Black Death reached Makkah. The plague, having swept from China across Asia and Europe, did not spare the holy city. Pilgrimage numbers plummeted, trade faltered, and many perished. Yet even this catastrophe could not silence the Hajj for long. Within years, the caravans returned, the chants of pilgrims once again echoing through the valleys. The Mamluks continued their patronage. They improved the Zamzam well, renovated parts of the Grand Mosque, and constructed new minarets and domes. They sent scholars, judges, and caretakers to oversee the city's administration. Each act of restoration reinforced their claim as defenders of Islam's sacred geography. By the 15th century, however, the Mamluk Sultanate was showing signs of decline. Corruption weakened its institutions, and its control over distant regions waned. Meanwhile, new powers were rising beyond its borders. In Anatolia, a young and vigorous Ottoman Empire was expanding under the leadership of Mehmed the Conqueror. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453 CE, the Ottomans turned their gaze southward. The Red Sea and the holy cities were too important to remain under a faltering power. As the 16th century approached, the balance of power shifted. The Mamluks, still custodians of the Hijaz, faced growing threats from both European and Ottoman expansion. Portuguese fleets had entered the Indian Ocean, threatening Muslim trade routes and pilgrim ships. In response, Mamluk rulers sent fleets to the Red Sea to defend the passage to Makkah. It was a struggle they would soon lose. In 1517 CE, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I defeated the Mamluks at the Battle of Radania near Cairo. With that victory, Egypt, Syria, and the Hijaz fell under Ottoman rule. The Sharif of Makkah swore allegiance to the new sultan, transferring the custodianship of the holy cities to Istanbul. Selim took the title Qadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, the servant of the two holy sanctuaries, title still borne by Saudi kings today. Thus ended the Mamluk era, and with it, the medieval chapter of Makkah's history. For nearly 3 centuries, the Mamluks had protected the city through wars, plagues, and economic revolts. They had built the infrastructure that allowed millions to reach the Kaaba safely. They had woven the Kiswa, repaired the mosque, and kept alive the traditions of the Hajj. Their legacy was not measured in monuments of marble or gold, but in endurance. They preserved Makkah's sanctity during one of the most turbulent ages in world history. And when their time passed, they handed it to the Ottomans not as a city in ruin, but as a living sanctuary, faith unbroken, its call to prayer unending. As the new masters of the Islamic world took up the mantle of guardianship, Makkah would once again become the focus of imperial devotion and architectural renewal. The centuries ahead would see it transform its mosques, expand, and multiply its pilgrims, woven into the global fabric of Islam. But through all transitions, one truth would endure. Makkah's strength lay not in the power of its rulers, but in the steadfast hearts of those who answered the eternal call, Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik. When the Ottoman banners reached the Hijaz in 1517 CE, a new chapter began for Makkah. The Mamluks were defeated, and Sultan Selim I, already master of Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt, received the allegiance of the Sharif of Makkah. The old order had fallen, but the sanctity of the holy cities remained untouched. Selim did not claim to be their conqueror, claimed to be their servant. He adopted the title Qadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, the servant of the two holy sanctuaries, signaling that the Ottomans would rule not through domination but through devotion. Under the Ottomans, Makkah's fate became interwoven with an empire that stretched from the Balkans to the Indian Ocean. The city, though distant from the imperial capital, was now part of a system that connected 3 continents. Pilgrims traveling from Cairo, Damascus, Istanbul, or Baghdad all journeyed under the same banner. The Hajj was not only a ritual of faith, but also a demonstration of imperial unity, a living thread that bound far-flung peoples through devotion to one sacred point. The Ottomans approached the task of stewardship with both reverence and precision. Their sultans financed restorations, improved caravan routes, fortified ports, and safeguarded the flow of pilgrims across deserts and seas. The administration of the Hijaz remained under the Sharifs, the Hashemite descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. But the Ottoman governors of Jeddah and Medina ensured that imperial authority was visible and continuous. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, r. 1520 to 1566 CE, oversaw some of the earliest major works in Makkah. He ordered the reinforcement of the Grand Mosque, repaired the Zamzam well, and expanded facilities for pilgrims. During his reign, the Ottomans established a system of Waqf endowments, charitable trusts across the empire that provided income for the maintenance of the holy cities. This ensured that Makkah's sustenance did not depend solely on local trade, but on a vast economic network that stretched from Egypt to India. Every year, two major pilgrim caravans set out, one from Damascus, the other from Cairo. These were no ordinary journeys. Each caravan was a moving city, carrying thousands of pilgrims, camels, guards, scholars, and supplies. The Emir al-Hajj, the commander of the caravan, was a position of immense honor. The Ottomans ensured that each caravan was escorted by soldiers to protect it from Bedouin raids. Along the routes, they built forts, wells, and stations, some of which still bear the names of their Ottoman founders. In 1626 CE, Makkah faced disaster. Torrential rains caused catastrophic flooding that severely damaged the Kaaba. The ancient structure's walls cracked, and part of its roof collapsed. In response, Sultan Murad IV ordered a complete reconstruction. Stones from local quarries were brought to restore the Kaaba's cubic form, and the work was carried out with solemn care, supervised by architects and religious scholars. The event became one of the most important reconstructions in the city's history, preserving the Kaaba's integrity for centuries to come. Over time, the Ottomans left their architectural imprint not only on the Kaaba but throughout Makkah. The Masjid al-Haram was expanded with new colonnades, arches, and marble floors. Water channels, known as qanats, were repaired and extended to bring clean water into the city. The Ottoman-style graceful domes, pointed arches, and intricate calligraphy melded with the older Arab designs, giving Makkah a distinctive sacred aesthetic that symbolized continuity through change. Yet Makkah was not merely a city of architecture. It was a city of pilgrims, and through them, it became the meeting point of the Islamic world. Each year, caravans brought people from every corner of the empire: Turks, Arabs, Persians, Kurds, Berbers, Indians, Malays, and Africans. In its streets, one could hear dozens of languages. Merchants from Cairo and Damascus sold silks and spices. Scholars debated theology and law. Mystics from distant lands recited poetry by the Kaaba's shadow. For a brief time each year, Makkah became a global capital without armies or kings gathering of hearts rather than empires. The Ottoman centuries also saw Makkah endure its share of challenges. The Red Sea, once dominated by Muslim fleets, began to attract new rivals. By the 16th century, the Portuguese had reached the Indian Ocean, threatening to intercept pilgrim ships and disrupt trade routes. In response, the Ottomans fortified the ports of Jeddah and Yanbu, stationed fleets in the Red Sea, and launched campaigns to secure Yemen. Makkah's safety depended on these distant wars. By the 18th century, however, the empire's reach had begun to weaken. Corruption spread through the provincial administrations, and the long routes to Arabia became harder to sustain. Makkah's sharifs, though still vassals of the Sultan, grew increasingly independent. They balanced between loyalty to Istanbul and the practical realities of ruling a city that depended on local tribes and pilgrimage revenues. Then, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the city found itself at the center of a religious upheaval. In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, a reformist movement arose under Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, calling for a return to the strict monotheism of early Islam. This movement allied with the powerful House of Saud, forming what would become the first Saudi state. By the early 1800s, their forces advanced across Arabia, capturing Makkah in 1803 CE. For a brief moment, Ottoman authority collapsed in the Hijaz. The new rulers enforced puritanical reforms. They removed decorative elements, discouraged local traditions, and emphasized a stricter creed. But the Ottomans would not relinquish the holy cities easily. With the help of Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, then an Ottoman viceroy, they launched a counteroffensive. In 1813 CE, Egyptian forces recaptured Makkah, reasserting Ottoman control. The city, shaken by invasion and reform, returned once more to imperial oversight. Throughout the 19th century, the Ottomans sought to modernize their stewardship. New technologies began to shrink distances. The Hejaz postal routes were improved. Steamships carried pilgrims across the Red Sea. And in the early 20th century, the Hejaz Railway was constructed, linking Damascus to Medina. The railway, completed in 1908 CE, was envisioned to extend all the way to Makkah, reducing the perilous caravan journey to a few days. It became a symbol of modern Islamic unity, steel tracks connecting faith to empire. But the line never reached Makkah. Tribal resistance and the coming of war halted its completion. Despite modernization, the city's rhythms remained ancient. Pilgrims still entered through narrow gates, still circled the Kaaba in the same motion their ancestors had for over 1,000 years. The Kiswa still arrived each year from Cairo, its black cloth embroidered with verses of gold. And above the city, the mountains still stood as they had in the Prophet's time, silent witnesses to centuries of devotion. But by the dawn of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was faltering. Nationalist movements stirred across its provinces. European powers encroached from all sides. In the Hejaz, the Sharif of Makkah, Hussein bin Ali, began to envision independence. He was a descendant of the Prophet and the hereditary guardian of the Kaaba, yet his loyalty to the Sultan was strained by growing distrust. When the First World War erupted in 1914, that tension would soon ignite into open revolt. In June 1916, Hussein declared the Arab Revolt, rising against Ottoman authority with British support. The revolt spread through the Hejaz, and battles raged near Makkah. Ottoman garrisons resisted but were eventually overwhelmed. By July, the city was in Hashemite hands, though not without tragedy. Shells fired during the siege struck near the Kaaba, damaging parts of the Grand Mosque, grim echo of the siege that had scarred it in 683 CE. The fall of Makkah marked the end of 4 centuries of Ottoman stewardship. The empire that had once been the guardian of the holy cities, that had rebuilt the Kaaba and connected the Islamic world through faith and architecture, was collapsing. Yet in their long custodianship, the Ottomans had preserved the sanctity of the Haram through war, plague, and political decay. They had expanded it, adorned it, and maintained it as the spiritual nucleus of a vast civilization. When the guns fell silent and new powers rose, Makkah stood as it always had, resilient, eternal. Empires had come and gone, but the call to prayer still echoed through its valleys, just as it had when the first caravan of believers circled the Kaaba. And as the Ottoman banners faded from the Hejaz, a new power emerged in the desert kingdom that would redefine Arabia and usher Makkah into the modern age. When the Arab Revolt erupted in June 1916 CE, Makkah once again found itself at the crossroads of history, a city where the destinies of empires, faith, and ambition collided. The Ottoman Empire, stretched thin by the First World War, still claimed sovereignty over the holy cities. But in Makkah, Sharif Hussein bin Ali, the Hashemite emir and direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, declared independence from Istanbul. His rebellion, fueled by both religious legitimacy and imperial politics, would reshape the Arabian Peninsula. The declaration came at dawn on June 10, 1916, when gunfire echoed across the Hijazi hills. Ottoman soldiers in Makkah were caught off guard as Hashemite fighters surrounded their barracks. Within days, the Sharif's forces seized control of the city. The Ottoman garrison surrendered after a short siege, and for the first time in 4 centuries, the Ottoman crescent was lowered from Makkah's ramparts. The banners of the Hashemite revolt, red, black, white, and green, rose above the city, symbolizing both independence and a new Arab identity. Hussein bin Ali declared himself king of the Arabs and custodian of the 2 holy mosques. To many, he was a liberator, restoring Arab sovereignty to the land of the Prophet. Yet his revolt was not born solely of faith. It was shaped by political calculation and promises from afar. The British, eager to weaken the Ottomans, had cultivated the Sharif as an ally. Through a series of letters, the Hussein-McMahon correspondence, British officials promised to recognize Arab independence after the war. In return, Hussein would mobilize the tribes against the Ottoman Turks. Thus, Makkah became the spiritual capital of a war that stretched from the Red Sea to Damascus. Sharif Hussein's sons, Ali, Abdullah, and Faisal, led campaigns across the Arabian deserts, assisted by British officers, the most famous of whom was T. E. Lawrence, known as Lawrence of Arabia. The desert campaigns, waged with guerrilla tactics, sabotaged Ottoman railways and disrupted supply lines. The once mighty Hijaz Railway, the artery that connected Damascus to Medina, became a symbol of Ottoman decline as Arab raiders blew up its bridges and rails. In the midst of the global conflict, the people of Makkah witnessed profound change. Pilgrims still arrived, though in fewer numbers due to the war's dangers. Trade suffered, and the city's economy faltered. Yet despite hardship, Makkah retained its sanctity. Even the warring factions, Ottoman and Hashemite alike, treated the city with reverence. No bombardment was allowed within the Haram. Both sides feared divine retribution for defiling the sacred precinct. By 1918 CE, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Sharif Hussein stood triumphant, his sons commanding vast territories. Faisal in Syria, Abdullah in Transjordan, and Ali in the Hijaz. For a brief moment, it seemed as though an Arab kingdom stretching from the Red Sea to the Euphrates might rise under the Hashemites. But as peace negotiations unfolded, reality proved more complex. The secret Sykes-Picot agreement between Britain and France had already divided the Middle East into spheres of influence, nullifying the promises of full independence. Makkah, under King Hussein, remained a symbol of pride and legitimacy. He emphasized his lineage as a descendant of the Prophet and the rightful guardian of Islam's holiest sites. But his vision clashed with the rising power of a new movement, one that emerged not from the cities, but from the heart of the Arabian desert. To the east, in the region of Najd, Abdulaziz ibn Saud was rebuilding his ancestral state. Driven by both political acumen and religious zeal, Ibn Saud led the Wahhabi movement, a puritanical reform rooted in the teachings of Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. The movement rejected what it saw as innovations and excesses in Islamic practice, advocating a return to the simplicity of the early faith. Under Ibn Saud's leadership, it became not merely a religious call, but a revolutionary force. While the Hashemites drew their strength from lineage and diplomacy, Ibn Saud's power came from unity, discipline, and faith. His followers, known as the Ikhwan, were desert warriors bound by religious conviction and loyalty. Throughout the 1920s, they swept across Arabia, subduing tribes and annexing territories. The world paid little attention at first. After all, Makkah's king still held the Kaaba. But the balance of power was shifting rapidly. In 1924 CE, tensions reached their breaking point. Sharif Hussein, angered by the British decision to recognize the French mandate in Syria and Iraq, refused to endorse the post-war settlements. His political isolation deepened. Meanwhile, Ibn Saud's forces advanced toward the Hijaz, framing their campaign as a mission to purify Islam's heartland. The Hashemite army, though brave, was small, fragmented, and poorly equipped. In August 1924, the Wahhabi Ikhwan forces seized Taif, a city near Makkah. The fall of Taif was brutal, a massacre that sent shockwaves through the Islamic world. News of the slaughter spread, and panic reached Makkah. King Hussein abdicated, leaving the throne to his son Ali bin Hussein, hoping his departure might prevent bloodshed. But it was too late. By October 1924, Ibn Saud's forces approached Makkah. The city's gates opened without resistance. No battle was fought within the sacred precincts. The inhabitants, fearing another Taif, surrendered peacefully. The new rulers entered the city with solemn restraint, declaring respect for the holy sites and forbidding any desecration. For the first time since the early 1800s, Makkah came under the rule of the House of Saud. King Ali fled to Jeddah, holding out for nearly a year before the city too fell in December 1925 CE. With that, the Hashemite kingdom of the Hijaz was no more. Abdulaziz ibn Saud, having unified Najd and the Hijaz, now controlled the heartlands of Arabia. In 1932 CE, he would formally proclaim the creation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, uniting the scattered tribes and provinces under one flag. The transition brought both reform and restriction. Under Saudi rule, the administration of Makkah shifted toward greater order and security. Pilgrimage routes were safeguarded, and efforts were made to stabilize the economy. Yet religious life became more regulated. The new rulers enforced strict monotheism, banned certain local customs, and simplified ceremonies surrounding the Hajj. The city, once filled with diverse Islamic traditions and Sufi practices, has now moved toward a more austere form of worship. For pilgrims arriving from Cairo, Delhi, or Jakarta, the change was noticeable. The ornate shrines and decorative practices that had once adorned Makkah were gone. The emphasis was on unity through simplicity, the same creed that had driven the early reformers of Najd. To some, it was a spiritual purification; to others, a loss of the city's rich religious heritage. Still, Makkah under Ibn Saud began to experience unprecedented stability. For centuries, the city had endured sieges, floods, and political turmoil. Now, a new order emerged, supported by modern institutions and a growing sense of national identity. The Saudis invested in maintaining the Haram, ensuring that pilgrims could perform the Hajj safely. The ancient conflicts between sharifs and sultans faded into memory, replaced by a central government in Riyadh that now claimed stewardship of the holy cities. By the early 1930s, the transformation of Makkah mirrored the transformation of Arabia itself from fragmented tribal domains into a unified state. The Kaaba, as it had for millennia, remained at the center of it all, constant amid change, the fixed axis of a world in motion. The old Hashemite dynasty, meanwhile, found new homes. Faisal became king of Iraq. Abdullah became ruler of Transjordan, later Jordan. The family that had once governed Makkah continued to shape the Arab world from afar. But the sacred city itself now belonged to a different dynasty, one that claimed legitimacy not through lineage, but through its vision of religious revival and unity. When Abdulaziz ibn Saud entered Makkah's Grand Mosque in the winter of 1925, he performed tawaf around the Kaaba in silence. No speeches, no triumphal display, only prayer. In that moment, centuries of conflict seemed to fold into a single act of submission before God. Makkah had witnessed the rise and fall of empires Abbasid, Fatimid, Mamluk, Ottoman, Hashemite. Yet through all, it endured as the axis of the Muslim world, the still point where power dissolved into faith. The city now stood on the threshold of modernity. Within a few years, the discovery of oil would transform the Arabian Peninsula into one of the world's wealthiest regions. Pilgrims would arrive not on camel caravans, but on ships, trains, and planes. And yet, beneath all the change, one truth would remain unaltered. The heart of Islam still beat in the Valley of Makkah. When the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was formally declared in 1932 CE, the city of Makkah entered a new age unlike anything in its long history. For centuries, it had been the center of faith, a city of pilgrims and prayers, of markets and merchants. But now, under the House of Saud, Makkah would also become a symbol of modernization, a city caught between the sacred and the modern, between timeless devotion and 20th century transformation. At the dawn of this new kingdom, Makkah was still a modest desert city. Its population was estimated at barely 40,000 people, clustered around the Grand Mosque. Narrow alleys wound between mud brick houses and Ottoman-era structures. Water was scarce, drawn from wells or carried in from distant valleys. Electricity was almost non-existent. Yet the city's importance was unmatched, the spiritual heart of over 200 million Muslims across the globe. King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, known in the West as Ibn Saud, understood that to govern Arabia, one must protect and manage Makkah. He approached the city not as a conqueror, but as a custodian. His rule marked the beginning of an era where Makkah's sanctity would be preserved, but its infrastructure would steadily expand to meet the needs of the modern world. In the 1930s, even before the discovery of oil transformed the Saudi economy, Ibn Saud began modest reforms. Roads connecting Makkah to Jeddah and Taif were improved. New accommodations for pilgrims were constructed. The local security forces, once tribal and disorganized, were formalized into a police administration to safeguard the Hajj. The Kaaba and the Masjid al-Haram were maintained with renewed attention. Repairs and cleanings became systematic rather than occasional. But the real transformation began after 1938 CE, when vast oil reserves were discovered in Dhahran, in the eastern province. The revenues that followed changed everything. With wealth pouring in, the Saudi monarchy was able to reimagine Makkah not only as a city of worship, but as a modern center of pilgrimage capable of hosting the growing global Muslim population. In the 1940s and 1950s, oil money began to reshape the landscape. New roads were paved through the desert. The Jeddah-Makkah Road, once a dusty track for camels and caravans, became a highway lined with fuel stations and rest houses. Electricity arrived, first to government buildings, then to private homes. The Grand Mosque received its first electric lighting, illuminating the Kaaba for night prayers, a sight unseen in all previous centuries. The 1950s also brought the first organized efforts to modernize the Hajj pilgrimage. With air travel becoming accessible, pilgrims began arriving from Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Indian subcontinent in unprecedented numbers. The government established the Ministry of Hajj to oversee logistics, housing, and health services. Hospitals were built, sanitation improved. King Saud bin Abdulaziz, who succeeded his father in 1953, initiated early expansions of the Masjid al-Haram to accommodate the surging crowds. Under his reign, bulldozers entered Makkah for the first time, a moment that symbolized both progress and controversy. Ancient houses, some dating back to the Ottoman and Abbasid periods, were demolished to make room for wider courtyards and marble pavements. Many residents mourned the loss of their city's historic character, but for the first time in its long history, Makkah could host hundreds of thousands of worshippers at once. By the 1960s, the city's population had reached over 150,000, and the pace of modernization accelerated under King Faisal. A visionary leader, Faisal saw Makkah as a city that should represent the unity of the Muslim world. He ordered the installation of loudspeakers throughout the Haram so the imam's voice could reach all corners of the vast courtyard. The call to prayer, once confined to the echo of human voices, now carried through electric amplification, uniting pilgrims in a single sound. King Faisal also expanded infrastructure beyond the mosque. Modern hotels, schools, and hospitals began to rise. Roads were widened to support buses instead of camel caravans. Water supply improved with the construction of the Ain Zubaydah Restoration Project, reviving an ancient aqueduct system originally built during the Abbasid era. The airport in Jeddah was expanded, allowing thousands of pilgrims to arrive by air each year. The 1970s brought both extraordinary growth and profound challenge. Oil prices soared after 1973, and Saudi Arabia's wealth multiplied. With that, Makkah saw unprecedented investment. Massive expansion plans were drafted for the Grand Mosque, including new minarets, marble flooring, and air conditioning systems to ease the heat of the desert. Pilgrim facilities, food distribution, and emergency medical care reached levels unseen in previous centuries. But prosperity came with tension. In 1979 CE, Makkah faced one of its darkest moments since medieval times. On November 20th, a group of armed militants led by Jahaman al-Otabai seized the Grand Mosque, claiming that corruption and Western influence had polluted the kingdom. For nearly 2 weeks, the world watched in horror as the Sacred Heart of Islam became a battleground. Saudi special forces, with assistance from foreign advisors, eventually retook the mosque after intense fighting. The episode left deep scars. Hundreds were killed, and the sanctity of the Haram was violated by violence. The incident marked a turning point. In its aftermath, the Saudi government doubled down on religious education and moral conservatism, tightening its alliance with the religious establishment. But it also recognized the need for greater control and security in Makkah, especially during Hajj. Surveillance, crowd management, and safety protocols became state priorities. Through the 1980s, the city continued to expand. New residential districts spread along the surrounding hills. The Hajj terminal at Jeddah Airport, a vast tent-like structure designed to handle millions of pilgrims, opened in 1981. The government also began constructing tunnels through the mountains to manage traffic and pedestrian movement. One of the most remarkable engineering projects of the late 20th century was the King Fahd expansion of the Grand Mosque. Begun in 1988 CE, it transformed the Haram's footprint, adding nearly 120,000 square meters of new prayer space. The project included new marble courtyards, cooling systems, and escalators, blending sacred tradition with cutting-edge technology. The 1990s saw Makkah emerge as a truly global city. By now, millions of Muslims were making the pilgrimage annually, not a few 100,000 as in earlier decades. Satellite television broadcast live images of the Hajj, connecting Muslims from Jakarta to Lagos, from Cairo to London, in real time. The city became both physical and symbolic, a living link uniting the entire Islamic world. Yet modernization brought dilemmas. The demolition of historic neighborhoods continued as old Ottoman, Abbasid, and even early Islamic-era structures were cleared to make space for hotels and roads. Scholars and heritage advocates lamented the loss of Makkah's ancient soul, but the government justified it as a necessity. The city's topography left little room for horizontal expansion. Every year, the number of pilgrims increased, demanding more space, better logistics, and modern accommodations. Despite criticism, the pace of development continued. The Jamarat Bridge in Mina was redesigned to manage the stoning ritual more safely after tragic stampedes claimed hundreds of lives in the 1990s. Public health initiatives, sanitation systems, and multilingual pilgrim support networks became global models of large-scale event management. By the end of the 20th century, Makkah had transformed beyond recognition. From the humble town of the early 1930s, it had grown into a dense metropolis with nearly 1 million residents. High-rise hotels, commercial towers, and vast pilgrim housing complexes ringed the Grand Mosque. The Kaaba, once surrounded by low mud brick homes and Ottoman archways, now stood at the heart of a modern, illuminated marble plaza. The city's identity had evolved not away from faith, but towards scale. Islam's rituals remained the same: the tawaf, the sai, and the prayer facing the Kaaba. Yet everything around them had multiplied the noise, the light, the movement of millions. Makkah had become a logistical marvel, an urban organism sustained by technology and devotion alike. By 2000 CE, the pilgrimage had become one of the world's largest annual human gatherings. Air routes, bus convoys, and digital coordination systems connected every continent to this single valley. The city that once received caravans from Yemen and Syria now receives jets from every corner of the globe. Through it all, the Kaaba remained untouched in its essence. The same cube of black granite draped in silk, the same Qibla for over 1 billion souls. The marble tiles may have been new, the skyline transformed, but the spiritual magnetism endured. In the span of less than 70 years, Makkah had crossed from the pre-modern to the global age. It was now a place where faith met infrastructure, where the eternal met the contemporary. The pilgrims who walked through its marble courtyards at the turn of the millennium were heirs to centuries of devotion, each step tracing the echoes of Abraham, Muhammad, and the countless millions who had come before. And yet, for all the glass towers and modern systems, the heart of Makkah remained unchanged. When the adhan rang out over the city at dusk, the sound still drifted through the same mountains that had witnessed its earliest call 14 centuries earlier. At the dawn of the 21st century, Makkah stood at a crossroads between memory and modernity. The city that once pulsed quietly beneath the desert sun now gleamed under floodlights and glass towers. Its mountains, long guardians of solitude, were being carved, tunneled, and reshaped to make room for the tides of humanity that arrived each year in the millions. Yet amid the machinery and motion, the Kaaba remained a silent, enduring heart that drew the world to its center. By 2000 CE, Makkah's transformation had reached a scale unimaginable to earlier generations. The Saudi government, propelled by oil wealth and a vision to manage the growing pilgrimage, embarked on one of the most ambitious urban redevelopment projects in modern history. At its center stood the Grand Mosque, the Masjid al-Haram, whose expansions had become a recurring rhythm of Saudi statecraft, each monarch leaving his mark in marble and minarets. In 2002 CE, King Fahd's final years saw the completion of projects begun in the previous decade: air conditioning systems, sound networks, and the continuous resurfacing of the white marble that stayed cool even under the summer sun. The mosque's courtyards, once lit by torches and lamps, now glowed with soft illumination from energy-efficient systems. But even as technology advanced, the sanctity of the site remained inviolate. Every expansion followed one rule: the Kaaba must remain untouched, its proportions unchanged, its simplicity preserved. Then came the 21st century surge. Global air travel, cheaper transportation, and population growth across the Muslim world created unprecedented pressure on Makkah's infrastructure. The number of pilgrims performing Hajj regularly exceeded 2 million, while Umrah pilgrims, those visiting outside the Hajj season, numbered several million more annually. Managing this scale required not only devotion but also science, logistics, and technology. The Saudi Hajj Ministry, in coordination with global agencies, began to implement sophisticated crowd management systems. Satellite monitoring, thermal imaging, and AI-based modeling helped predict the flow of pilgrims. The once chaotic mass of humanity performing Tawaf and Sa'i became increasingly choreographed not by command, but by design. Yet modernization was not without controversy. The city's ancient topography, its neighborhoods, centuries-old homes, and Ottoman-era buildings continued to vanish under bulldozers. In 2004, the construction of the Abraj al-Bayt Towers began, a colossal complex that would forever alter Makkah's skyline. When completed in 2012, the centerpiece of the Makkah Royal Clock Tower rose more than 600 meters high, dominating the city and standing among the tallest structures on Earth. To some, it was a marvel, a sign of Makkah's entry into the global age, a beacon guiding pilgrims to the sanctuary below. To others, it was a symbol of dissonance, modern ambition looming over ancient faith. The tower's shadow fell across the Kaaba, a visible metaphor for the tension between the sacred and the commercial. The clock tower complex contained luxury hotels, shopping malls, and residential suites overlooking the Haram. Where once stood Ottoman fortresses and Mamluk homes, now gleamed glass and steel. Critics lamented the loss of heritage. Over the 2000s, historic landmarks including the Ayyad Fortress, the House of Khadija, and many early Islamic-era sites were demolished or buried beneath development. The government defended its actions as necessary for safety and capacity. The old city, it argued, could no longer hold the millions who now arrived from every corner of the planet. In its place arose the new Makkah, efficient, organized, and global. The 2010s marked a new phase of expansion. Under King Abdullah, the largest expansion of the Grand Mosque in history began. This monumental project, launched in 2011, aimed to increase capacity to 2.5 million worshippers. Entire neighborhoods Shamaya, Jabal Omar, and parts of Misfala were cleared to make room for new plazas, colonnades, and access roads. The work combined architectural modernity with spiritual symbolism, geometric patterns, calligraphy, and marble inlays, evoking the unity of faith across centuries. The city also witnessed an infrastructural revolution. The Makkah Metro, inaugurated in 2010, connected Mina, Arafat, and Muzdalifah, dramatically reducing congestion during Hajj. Smart card systems replaced paper permits, and digital ID bracelets tracked pilgrims for safety. Surveillance systems monitored movement in real time, ensuring that crowd surges could be dispersed before tragedy struck. Still, challenges persisted. Despite improvements, stampedes occasionally occurred, revealing the difficulty of managing human movement on such an enormous scale. Tragedies like the 2015 Mina stampede, which claimed hundreds of lives, cast shadows over the city's otherwise remarkable progress. Each incident prompted deeper investment in crowd management technology and emergency preparedness. Meanwhile, environmental and urban concerns grew. The destruction of mountains for construction altered the city's landscape permanently. The ancient Jabal Omar and Jabal Qandama ridges were excavated to make room for high-rise hotels and new residential quarters. The city, once hemmed in by its mountains, now stretched outward into valleys connected by highways and tunnels. By the mid-2010s, Makkah's skyline resembled no other on Earth, a blend of futuristic architecture and timeless ritual. Pilgrims moved along air-conditioned walkways, while digital billboards displayed prayer times and safety instructions in dozens of languages. Every year, over 10 million visitors entered the city, yet beneath the technological precision lay a pulse unchanged since antiquity. The rhythmic circling of the Kaaba, the murmured prayers, the tears of those who arrived after lifetimes of longing. In 2016, under King Salman and his son Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Makkah entered a new chapter within the framework of Vision 2030, a national plan to diversify the Saudi economy and enhance global engagement. Part of that vision included reimagining Makkah as not just a religious destination, but a sustainable, smart city of the future. Digital Hajj services were introduced, including the Smart Pilgrim platform, which streamlined visa applications, transport coordination, and accommodation assignments. By the late 2010s, pilgrims could navigate the city using apps offering real-time crowd updates and multilingual assistance. Artificial intelligence predicted foot traffic density within the Grand Mosque, adjusting entry and exit routes dynamically. At the same time, major restoration and preservation efforts began to surface. While much of old Makkah had vanished, the government initiated projects to document surviving historic sites, protect the remaining Ottoman porticos, and digitize archives of the city's early photography. Though modernization had often erased the past, it now sought to record it before it was lost entirely. Then, in 2020 CE, Makkah experienced one of its most surreal moments in centuries. The COVID-19 pandemic forced Saudi authorities to suspend the Hajj for the first time in modern history. For months, the marble courtyards of the Grand Mosque lay almost empty, a haunting image broadcast worldwide. Only a few hundred pilgrims, all local, performed the rituals under strict precautions. The sight of the Kaaba standing in silence, surrounded by vacant space, became an emblem of a world paused. It reminded believers of both fragility and faith that even the busiest city on earth could fall still, but the sacred remained. When restrictions eased in 2021 and pilgrims returned, the tears that flowed around the Kaaba were not only of devotion but of relief, gratitude, and resilience. Emerging from the pandemic, Makkah resumed its expansion. New towers continued to rise. Smart monitoring systems multiplied. The Grand Mosque Expansion Project, now spanning over 1.5 million square meters, became the largest religious complex in the world. Pilgrims entering through the King Abdullah Gate passed beneath towering arches symbolizing both reverence and renewal. Yet for all the changes in the technology, the glass, and the global logistics, Makkah's essence persisted. Each year, millions arrived from every language and nation, their differences erased by a single garment, the Ihram, and a single direction, the Kaaba. No other city could compress such diversity into such unity. For historians, Makkah in the 21st century represents a paradox, a city where modernity serves tradition, where digital management sustains ancient ritual, and where faith continues to define identity amid transformation. It stands as a living testament that history does not end, it adapts. Today, as the city enters the mid-2020s, it continues to balance preservation with progress. The Saudi government promotes heritage tours, cultural museums, and digital archives alongside billion-dollar infrastructure projects. Plans for sustainable energy, waste management, and smart transport aim to ensure that Makkah remains habitable for generations to come. And yet, for every pilgrim who enters the Haram, the modern skyline fades from consciousness. In the shadow of the Kaaba, time collapses. The rituals, unchanged since the 7th century, still connect the believer to Abraham, to Hagar, to Muhammad. The marble and steel may change, but the compass of the human heart still points to the same black-draped cube. The story of Makkah, from Macoraba on Ptolemy's map to the glowing metropolis of today, is a narrative of endurance. It is the story of how a desert valley became the spiritual navel of humanity, how dynasties rose and fell around it while it remained immutable. The prophet's birthplace, the Qibla of the world, the gathering of nations, Makkah, endures because it transcends history itself. Every year, when the Hajj concludes and the multitudes depart, silence briefly returns. The marble courtyards are empty, and the Kaaba stands alone once more. In that moment, the city breathes, remembering that beneath the lights and architecture, it is still the same valley blessed in ancient scripture. The eternal city, as it was and will remain the heart to which the world turns and the axis upon which faith revolves. Across time, Makkah has stood as both witness and participant in the human story, an unbroken chain of faith, resilience, and renewal. From the earliest caravans that wandered across the Hijaz to the millions who arrive by air each year, the city's heartbeat has remained steady, unyielding to the centuries. Makkah is not a relic of the past. It is the living continuity of human devotion, stretching across empires and ages, through silence and noise, through simplicity and splendor. When one studies its history not through the lens of myth or theology, but through the record of time, a profound realization emerges. Every era has left its imprint, yet none have altered the city's essence. The pre-Islamic tribes of the Quraysh once ruled its valley, protecting trade and ritual. Then came the message of Islam, reshaping not only Makkah's destiny but the moral axis of the world. From the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century to the rise of the Abbasids, the Ottomans, and the Saudi dynasty, Makkah's sanctity has remained its shield. Even when the banners above its gates changed from Abbasid black to Ottoman red, from Hashemite white to the green of the Saudis, the Kaaba stood unmoved. It has been rebuilt and repaired, yet never replaced. It has been approached by conquerors and custodians alike, but none have claimed it for themselves. For in Makkah, every ruler becomes merely a servant, a caretaker of what cannot be owned. In tracing its history from 150 CE to the present, one witnesses the rise of a global symbol, a city that began as a small settlement in the mountains and became the spiritual capital of 1 billion souls. But beyond faith, Makkah's story is also one of human ingenuity. The survival of this valley in a landscape so inhospitable speaks to a civilization's ability to adapt. Water channels carved from stone in antiquity evolved into pipelines of desalinated water. Dusty trails once followed by camel caravans now align with highways and rail networks. Yet despite the grandeur of technology and the shine of modern towers, the city's most powerful moment remains the same. A pilgrim standing barefoot on cool marble, facing a cube draped in black cloth, whispering prayers carried by the desert wind. That image, unchanged in its simplicity, transcends time. Makkah's endurance is not accidental. It has been shaped by constant renewal, the delicate balance between protecting sanctity and embracing necessity. Every generation has faced that tension. The Abbasids expanded the Haram for new crowds. The Ottomans fortified it. The Saudis industrialized it. And now, the 21st century digitizes it. But beneath every expansion lies the same impulse to ensure that no believer, no matter where they come from, is ever turned away from the house of God. It is in this inclusivity that Makkah's universality lies. Here, race dissolves, language dissolves, status dissolves. Every pilgrim, whether king or laborer, wears the same white garment. Every hand raised in prayer becomes indistinguishable. This unity, formed not by law but by faith, has shaped the moral imagination of civilizations for centuries. Yet, Makkah's story is not only sacred, it is deeply human. Its past is filled with struggles, droughts that nearly emptied the valley, invasions that threatened its peace, and transformations that erased parts of its memory. Each loss carved into its stone another lesson in endurance. The city has been both victim and victor of a history torn by necessity, healed by faith. As historians and storytellers look upon its timeline, they see not a straight line, but a spiral vent returning, echoes repeating, always orbiting around that central cube. Just as pilgrims circle the Kaaba in Tawaf, history too circles Makkah, each revolution bringing change, yet reaffirming constancy. Today, Makkah stands not only as a city of worship, but as a mirror of humanity's evolution. Its marble courtyards host smartphones and supplications in the same breath. Pilgrims live stream their prayers, yet their tears fall for the same reason as those who came 1,000 years before. The modern skyline may glitter with ambition, but it frames a ritual older than empire itself. In that lies the city's enduring power, its capacity to absorb change without losing identity. The skyscrapers, the digital maps, and the air-conditioned corridors are all passing phases in a much longer continuum. What remains eternal is what has always been, the turning of hearts toward the Kaaba. From a historian's perspective, Makkah's survival defies the natural order. Most ancient cities rise and fall, their ruins marking the passing of civilization. Babylon, Nineveh, Thebes, they all crumbled into silence. Makkah, however, endures not as ruin but as rhythm. It renews itself continuously, fueled by faith rather than conquest. It exists not because of its geography, but because of its gravity, the spiritual force that pulls humanity back to its center generation after generation. Every pilgrim who leaves the valley takes a fragment of that gravity with them, a memory of a sound, a scent, a silence. And in that diffusion lies Makkah's greatest legacy. The city's true expansion is not in marble, but in hearts. It has expanded across continents through the prayers of those who once walked its courtyards. If one were to strip away the noise of centuries and listen closely, one would still hear the same ancient call, the adhan, echoing from minarets across the valley. Come to prayer, come to success. That sound, carried by the wind through the narrow streets and polished arcades, binds the past to the present. It is the same call that echoed when the prophet walked these hills, the same sound that will rise tomorrow and 1,000 years after. And so, as this chronicle draws to a close, one truth remains clear. Makkah is not merely a city. It is a living testament to faith's endurance through time. It has outlasted kings and revolutions, earthquakes and plagues, and will likely outlast us all. For as long as there are hearts that turn in prayer, Makkah will remain the axis of human devotion, a city that belongs to no one and yet to everyone. The story of Makkah, then, is not finished. It never will be. It continues each time a pilgrim raises their hands in the courtyard, each time a new generation hears the name and feels a stirring within. History will keep circling this valley because the world itself still revolves around it. And as the sun sets behind its mountains and the Kaaba glows beneath the night sky, one feels the whisper of eternity, reminding us that in Makkah, time does not pass. It returns,